Today we're going to be taking a first look at a budget-friendly bike that doesn't have the normal problems and the normal issues that most of us see with bikes in that price range. And it's from an unexpected brand, Mongoose. Let's get into it. So this is the Mongoose Switchback Expert. You can see it's got it right there on the top tube. This is a really interesting bike. This is gonna be sold at Dick's Sporting Goods, and it's replacing the GT line that Dick's has had for a really long time. The first thing you're gonna notice about this bike is actually not the bike itself, but the price point. It comes in at under $1,000. Bikes that usually come in at this price point have a few problems. Typically, their geometry is super outdated, which is a major problem that totally affects the way the bike rides and just causes all sorts of problems with, you know, how much fun you're gonna be able to have and how capable it is. Even more than other things like the suspension fork. That's where this bike is really interesting. A lot of these end up in more of like the conservative cross-country geometry specs with steeper head tube angles, a really short reach, things like that. This doesn't have that. It's running a 100mm fork up front, the Suntour XCE 28. And while that is still cross-country territory, it has a 66.5-degree head tube angle, which is pretty dang slack, especially for, you know, a bike like this in this category. The seat tube is also nice and steep. It's at 75 degrees. This is a size large, and it has a 470 reach and a 620 stack, which honestly, I'm impressed with that. 470 is nice and long, and the stack it's a little bit lower compared to some of the really aggressive hardtails and mountain bikes out there, but it's not super low. 620 is still moderately tall. Coming back here, the chain stays are 445 on the large. Now that's not the shortest out there, but I think 440-ish is about what I've found that I really like. If you go too short, you know, 430 or lower, you end up with a bike that is mostly only fun on really rowdy trails. Otherwise, it just kind of feels awkward and weird on the tamer stuff. You might also notice this right here. Obviously, not everyone's gonna love the looks of that, but it does give you a really low standover. So on a size large, the standover is 706. So tons of clearance there. I did swap the bars out already. They were better than that State fat bike I had. Those were like 700 millimeters and no rise or anything like that. This had a bar that was 720 millimeters with 15 millimeters of rise. I will say on the size large, I don't know. I look at that. You know, it seems to be a problem on some of these bikes. For some reason, the seat posts are never tall enough. Like I am very squarely in their large category, but I am almost to the minimum insertion point on that seat post right there. I already mentioned the fork, but it is coil sprung, so it's not super high end. But these are known for being pretty reliable, so I wouldn't worry too much about it. Another cool feature of the frame is tapered head tube, and even this actually has a reducer in it, so you can use the same cup, the headset cup in there. It's a ZS56. So if you wanted to replace that, all you'd need is a new Crown Race. You would probably want to replace the front wheel at the same time. They don't look the highest end anyway, so you might want to do that, but I will definitely put these to the test. They don't look terrible, but they are somewhat heavy. There's no brand, nothing. They're just pretty generic. One cool thing that Mongoose did on this is when you get down to the small, they've adjusted the wheel size. So it's not available in a 29er. I don't know if it'll clear. I'm guessing not. But it comes with a 27.5, as well as it comes with shorter chainstays. And that's the reason I say I don't know if the 29er will fit or not, because instead of 445 on the small, it's 435. The Expert does come with hydraulic disc brakes, 160mm rotors front and rear, and it's the Nut brand. Never heard of that. Sounds interesting. Drivetrain though is running microshift. You should have heard of them. And the Acolyte, it's a 1x8 with a 32 tooth chainring on the front and a 12, interestingly, 12 to 42 on the rear. Now this does have a clutch and it's adjustable right here. And there's the little lever turning on or off. I will say I've been impressed with these drivetrains that are, you know, 8, 9, 10 speed. but still a pretty wide range. 42 isn't super wide, but you know, it's good enough. Especially, we've come a long way. A couple things I'm gonna mention before I go ride. There is internal dropper post routing right here, comes down and then actually goes back into the frame right there. And all the cable routing's internal. I actually do not like that, especially on a hardtail, but a lot of people think it looks cleaner, looks a little bit better. So, I don't know, maybe that's your thing. Let's go ride. It's been a while since I rode just a regular old hardtail, especially one with such skinny tires. I didn't mention it when I was going through the frame, but you could definitely clear something bigger back there. I don't think it's listed what the max tire size is, but you could definitely fit a 2.35, maybe even a 2.4 on the back. Might have spoken too soon on that gear range. I'm in the 42. This section is like these weird little whoops up, and they get real steep. Even going down to a 30-tooth chainring would help a bit, but then you've only got a 12 on the other end, so you're gonna lose a lot of top end speed. Gearing aside though, it's a pretty good little climber. That steep seat tube angle gets you forward, despite that reach, because 470 on a large is pretty dang modern. I actually prefer mine more like 460, so a tiny bit shorter, but I'm not feeling the front end lift or anything. I'm keeping plenty of traction on the front. Geometry wise though, so far it's great. If I don't look down and I just ride, it doesn't feel like I'm on a bike that's less than $1,000. It feels a lot more modern and everything. Although we all know where the real test is gonna come, on the descent when it gets technical. All right, I just tried to hit my dropper, which obviously is not there, but let's see how this does. These are definitely some 2-finger brakes. Woo. Huh, not bad. Getting some creakiness out of the drivetrain. It does come with a quick release clamp, so if you know you got a long descent, you could always manually drop it, you know? I realized I didn't weigh this, so I'll do that when I get home without the pedals. Even with these low end wheels, it rolls pretty well. It feels, it doesn't feel like a big heavy bike. All right, let's hit some single track for a sec. This didn't used to be in my original test loop, but I added it. It's just kind of an enjoyable uphill with a few little downhills, moderate grade, some little rocks here and there. The fork isn't all bad. Honestly, like, it responds a little better than I anticipated, but it is loud. All right, up to where I'm pretty much just gonna be descending the whole time. So I think I'm gonna stop and lower the seat post. I'll just deal with the flat sections and the little uphills. I have to man up and push it, but I did raise this again. So seat post is a problem. I'm not gonna go all the way down. That's as low as you can go, if you were wondering. It's probably hitting that curve right there, but I'm gonna go a little bit above that because there will be some pedaling. Being able to put an internal dropper though is pretty much like, that's awesome. I appreciate that more than them throwing a better fork on, spending the money to put that routing there. You could always go with an external, but there's no, then they'd have to, I don't know, I guess they'd have to put some sort of mount on here. So I do love that. Dropper posts are a big deal. I either need to change my brake setup or like where the levers are, or these are just not great brakes. But it might be a combination.
The derailleur clutch is working pretty well. I feel like they get really noisy and rocky stuff, but even on these bigger hits, it's staying pretty quiet. I can hear my keys jingling in my backpack, but that's it. Very confident on the descent. This is a great geometry for this type of riding. I know this looks boring to some of you, but greens and blues, and even being able to hit a few blacks probably are what this bike is for. But you're gonna probably hit the component limit before you hit the geometry limit. Ooh. It's not super playful, but it's not a boring bike to ride. It gets a little rockier and a little more technical here. Ooh, these brakes. Oh yeah, maybe the clutch struggles a little more than I thought. Yeah. Again though, the bike itself is very confident. The components are going to be your weak part, but you can upgrade those. Can't change the geometry. I've ridden other budget bikes. It makes me shy away from little bonus lines or avoid rock gardens. You know, just take different lines to avoid the trauma, basically, and the loss of control. I don't really feel that with this, and I'm sure I'd get used to this fork, but I'm trying to think of what would be the first thing I'd upgrade. The brakes are bedding in a little bit more, so they're getting better. The levers are kind of set up wrong. I need to adjust that. Thought I had them right, but I don't. Lost the tire right there. Oh, and my chain. Okay, well, might have pushed that a little bit. Whew. Okay. So far, I'm thinking this could be a very good NICA bike. So for, you know, teenagers, middle school, high school, for their mountain bike leagues, especially for a kid who's maybe a little more hesitant about it, doesn't want to drop as much. I know there's programs for that help out, but for the places that there aren't, chainstay is a little long. I think 440 might have been a tad better, but I think I'd trade that 5mm for a little more tire clearance. This is where I feel like the more technical testing is going to happen. Whew. This will get me in shape, I guess. The standing, pushing a bigger gear. These tires aren't bad, but it's really loose out here. Whew. I did not know that was a drop. Whoa. Yeah, these narrower tires on loose terrain are not the best combination. This is a fun section. I feel like I can attack on this. The front end is so long, in a good way, not so long. It's just long, so I don't feel ever like I'm gonna fall forward. It feels planted, even when it's steep. Hit the side of that a little. All right, so finish that ride up. Given the price point on this bike, I am very impressed. I think for a long time, we've all kind of known geometry is king. That's what determines so much about a bike. And I think Mongoose took note of that and they really delivered on it. There are definitely some things that could maybe be changed that would help it out a little bit to be a little more playful and a little more trail capable. Like I think the bottom bracket is a smidge low and the rear end is a tiny bit too long, but I think it probably makes it a better all-rounder, honestly. So I don't know that that's a bad thing. As expected, I think the weakest part is going to be the components on this, but those are all upgradable, and that's what makes this such a good bike, because typically these low-end bikes, you could upgrade them. You could throw a different fork on there. They might even be able to accept a tapered fork, which is, you know, a huge obstacle, but if they can fit that on there, you still are limited usually by the geometry, and that's where you run into problems. You're kind of stuck with a outdated cross-country geometry that doesn't make it as good for trail riding and the more aggressive riding of today. I think the other thing people are gonna have a really hard time with is probably the quick release. This is Boost 141, so there are hubs where you could take a much nicer wheel, swap the end caps out. I know DT Swiss does this. I did it with a fat bike, went from 197 through axle to 191 QR. So you should be able to do that with this. That's a nice thing about them making it a 141 instead of a 135. And then the front, obviously you swap out the fork. You can have it be 110, like a Boost spaced with through axles, or just a 100 through axle. I think this is a great entry-level bike so far. I'm really interested to see how this does in the long-term testing, to see how it does durability-wise, if there are any things that crop up that I'm like, ooh, didn't notice that on that first ride. And that's one reason I always do this. I always do this first initial look with a first ride. And yes, I say lots of things about the bike. You can take that impression if you want and run with that and have that be your review and your decision on it. But I would encourage you to come back and look, you know, in a couple months, 6 weeks maybe, and see what I think then. That's kind of my more in-depth review. So if you do want to see that, make sure you subscribe. I want to say thanks to Mongoose for sending this out. This is going to be a fun little bike to have for me to test out. So anyway, thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.